Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Football is back, and yes, I know we did an Arsecast Extra yesterday on Thursday after the Man City game, but the situation, the circumstances, it's all just a bit messed up at the moment, isn't it? And football has come back after 3 months away, so schedules and podcast schedules aren't quite what they used to be, and I thought given it's Friday we should have a regular Arsecast, so that's what we're going to do. Would you like a podcasting tip, pro tip from a podcaster who's been doing this for how long now? Since 2006, so we're into like year 14 of the Arsecast. Here's a pro tip for you. Do not, under any circumstances, if you are a podcast host, eat a handful of peanuts just before you put the mic up. It's not possible. It is possible, but nobody wants to listen to what that sounds like. So if you are thinking of setting up your own podcast, put that on the list of do's and don'ts, very much in the don't column. Arsenal play Brighton this weekend. Again, it's very, very difficult to preview games because of everything that's going on. We just played on Wednesday. How are the players going to be affected, etc., etc.? We just don't know. We've got some injury worries, of course, with Pablo Mari. He's going to be out for some time. I was going to say we have suspension worries, but I'm not sure how worried I am that David Luiz is suspended for this game and the next game. But in terms of personnel and squad depth and what have you, we do have some problems, things for Mikel Arteta to think about. But I'm not going to faff around for too long at the start of this particular podcast. We should just get on with the guest and see where the chat takes us. So I am delighted to welcome back to the show from Football London, it's James Benge. Hello, James.
Hello.
Hello indeed. That was, I don't know how to describe that hello. It just caught me off guard. Look, let's just go back very briefly to Wednesday night to Manchester City, a game that Arsenal lost 3-0. Weird circumstances going into the game because of everything that's happening. Losing 2 players to injury inside the first 20 minutes. Losing 3-0. All kind of familiar in terms of what happens when Arsenal face Manchester City, and not much of it, hugely surprising. But were there any takeaways for you from the game that maybe we haven't explored, either on the blog or on the podcast yesterday, that myself and James did?
I found Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang I found that really interesting, his whole experience of the game, because I think, we saw that clip, didn't we, of I'm sure a lot going around on social of him making that run, and I think it was Eddie Nketiah kind of failing to spot him.
I think it was Kieran Tierney, was it? Or no, was that the first one?
Well,
there was two.
There's in that opening 20 minutes, which I think we can agree was, there were sort of half signs of promise there. There were 3 occasions where Aubameyang made these really interesting runs, kind of in from the left into the gap behind Walker and Garcia at centre-back, and no one spotted him. And I don't necessarily blame the players that didn't spot him, because you've got Tierney, who has quite possibly never played with Aubameyang ahead of him. And then you've got Nketiah and Willock. They're not of the level of experience to just know to pick that pass. But I also noticed he made more interceptions than anyone on the pitch. He was running himself to the ground, particularly in the first half. I just found it really interesting in the context of Arsenal, sort of, as Arteta admitted, needing to prove to Aubameyang that this is a club where he can, they can give him a stage to shine. And the first game back, he's been given the biggest stage in the world today. Probably the biggest news story almost in Britain, and he just gets to chase the ball non-stop for 90 minutes. I'm speculating here, but moments like that, if I were in Aubameyang's position, they're the sort of things that would have me thinking, do I really want to sign up for another couple of years of this?
Yeah.
There's so much we can talk about with his future, but I just
felt
really. Sorry is probably a bit much, but I felt really disappointed on his behalf. I thought it was
right.
He must have felt very frustrated.
Let me just sort of turn that around a little bit, because it is really interesting, and the debate about Aubameyang from the left-hand side is one that has raged ever since he joined the club, and people say it's a waste playing him out there, but I suppose the thing is he does score a lot of goals from that position, and B, we don't really have anyone else, apart from this season when Gabriel Martinelli stepped up a little bit, we don't have anyone else who can score goals from that left-hand side on a consistent basis. We do have another very expensive striker in the shape of Alex Lacazette. And we do have Eddie Nketiah coming through, who Mikel Arteta seems to rate very, very highly indeed. So in that context, you know, the argument or the debate over Aubameyang from the left-hand side, and look, let me just say, I'm not averse to playing Aubameyang as a central striker. I just wonder, would the discussion be different if Tierney had made that pass and put him in behind, if the first opportunity to play him in behind had been made? You know, they were quite similar. Was it just before the lockdown, there was a game, I think David Luiz was the guy who played the pass and just played the pass through the inside left channel. Aubameyang made the run, scored the goal, and everyone was delighted. So I just wonder, from Aubameyang's point of view, is the frustration that he's not being played central, or is it the frustration of being a guy who can make runs in that position without the people in the team to take advantage of that?
Yeah, I would probably lean towards the latter. And I think it's, you know, obviously we know David Luiz can play the pass, but he was busy doing other things.
For a short period of time before he was asked to go and take an early bath, Yeah.
You know, in terms of the positioning stuff, I would agree with you that I don't really think it's a great problem playing him off that left flank. You know, his goal return, his assist return is higher there. I think it almost just sort of serves to remind you how few players there are in this squad that are kind of capable of playing. It's not an easy pass, and I think it's a pass that, you know, players like Nketiah and Willock, you kind of have to understand they've not played against a team like Man City before. But in terms of players that could really, you know, play Aubameyang in on goal, you've got Luis, Xhaka, Ozil, and we can have a debate about Ozil, to be frank. I'm sure we will. He's going to be. I can almost see the sort of the narrative of the season developing to a stage where Aubameyang is making these runs. He's trying to get in goal scoring positions, but there's no one capable of getting him in there. Yeah,
so maybe the issue isn't so much Aubameyang on the left, but the lack of creativity behind him in order to exploit that.
Yeah. And I just don't know what the solution to that is. And I don't know how Arteta solves this. I mean, I kind of looked at the team Arteta named, and you see some semblance of a plan. You can kind of see what he wants to do. But I think, you know, if Guardiola had lost, you know, if he'd lost two senior players, if he'd lost De Bruyne and Sterling, well, he would have brought on Sane and Bernardo Silva. Arteta, the squad, just what really kind of shone through for me was just how hamstrung that Arteta is with that squad. There are so many players there who I just don't trust to do very much. I just don't trust them to make a positive impact on the game. And I hadn't really thought that before the City game. And we knew they were miles behind. You know, we knew Arsenal were miles behind City, and we, you know, you understand that because Arsenal don't have limitless pockets. But like, God, there's such a gulf in quality. I think that was the only thing that really stood out for me. You've got Aubameyang, you've got Leno, and then you've got kind of a bit of the rest feel to it.
Yeah, I mean, look, there is clearly an issue with the depth of the squad and issues with the structure of the squad and the way the squad has been built and constructed over the last number of years in what feels like a short-term way. You know, you think back to the January of 2018 when we brought Aubameyang in. You know, again, I loved the player, but, you know, we have to look at it in the context in which it happened. It was an attempt, I think, to get goals, to get Arsenal back into the Champions League. You know, within a couple of months of Aubameyang joining, Arsene Wenger was leaving. You know, that whole thing was being reconstructed, if you like, with Gazidis and Sanyehi and Sven Mislintat, and that fell apart. And, you know, again, it feels like the decisions that have been made in terms of some of the recruitment were short-term to try and achieve re-entry into the Champions League, Mkhitaryan, blah, 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 you know. And it hasn't worked out. And the problem is that when you buy players of that kind of profile, A, they don't have a great deal of resale value, and B, they're not going to really develop. Like Socrates is not a player who is going to come to Arsenal and develop as a defender. You know, he was there to do a short-term job and hasn't been able to do it particularly well, and that's not necessarily his fault per se. It is what it is, but it does raise those questions about how things are being constructed, and does sort of hammer home the point that if Arsenal want to get back to where they say they want to get back to, they are going to have to do it differently.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to take it down this whole tangent. I just haven't seen any real evidence that the individuals in charge of building this squad, and that's not Arteta, that they're actually doing a good job. People like Raul Sanllehi need time, and we may only see how good he was at his job when he has finished his job. But if you look at recruitment, there's been very little. None of the short-term moves have really strengthened the squad. I mean, Bernd Leno looks like an outlier, and obviously a few of these signings that have been good go back to the Mislintat days. And then you kind of think, well, wait a minute, did they just get a lucky break with the players from Hale End? Because they're also good that anyone could see. Here's a collection of really good young players. We've got to play them. I don't think that's something that should be adorning the cap of Edu and Sanllehi and Husfami. And I think I'm obviously, you and I were both in the press conference yesterday, and it's a struggle to remember what Mikel Arteta said and when it was embargoed to. But I think it was kind of really clear that, that there's just I think it's a frustration from him in terms of how this squad has been set up. And I think he only really has kind of come to understand that when every option's been available to him. It's short-term fixes. It's, players on loan that I don't really see have added any great value to the squad. And gaping holes in midfield and defence. I mean, people will, playing devil's advocate, people will say Gabriel Martinelli is an exciting young talent, which of course he is. Kieran Tierney, we hope, will be, the left back for the future. And I liked him before he arrived, and he's a signing that I was happy that we made. William Saliba, who of course every day before he arrives at Arsenal becomes even better and even better. I said to somebody today, I hope this guy is about 3 times better than we all hope he is in order to fix our defensive problems. And his reply was something along the lines of, well, if he's half as good as we think he is, he'll make a big difference. But this is still, these are still things which haven't quite worked out. There are question marks over things. And I mean, do you worry a little bit about the profile of the people that we have at the top of the club in terms of, what their specialities are and what their I mean, if you look at Sanllehi, right, what is he? He's a deal maker, a closer, a fixer. That was supposed to be his role in that triumvirate with Gazidis and Mislintat. Mislintat was going to identify the talent. Sanllehi was the guy who was going to go out and press the flesh and get the deals done with his little black book of contacts. Unfortunately, it seems he needs a lot of help, often expensive help from agents to get those deals done. So you question the efficacy of his work. Edu, we don't really know what it is that he's doing. He came from he's the technical director, but the job that he did in Brazil with the Brazil national team was sort of more a coordinator's job, an administrator's job. It wasn't about finding talent. And we have a scout, Francis Cajigao, who has, some real successes to his name, but, has been in the job or at the club for a long number of years. I just wonder if perhaps the balance there isn't quite right in terms of long-term talent identification. And I think when, we're not speaking out of turn here or breaking any kind of embargo in terms of the press conference, but it does seem quite clear that Mikel Arteta is someone who isn't necessarily content with the squad as it stands and is definitely looking for improvements to be made. I completely agree with all that. I think the Edu thing it's a really tough one to get to get your handle on, because we know Edu as a player. We all liked Edu as a player, and kind of assumed we would be getting that elegant, charming, if you can be charming while playing football, that sort of figure. But then I have never heard from him. He, there were some quotes from him distributed when he joined the club while they were out in the US. But, I understand Arsenal's point of view that they don't want executives constantly fronting up, and they don't want executives to be the talking point. And they saw what happened when Sagné made a commitment about players not running into the final year of their contract. But, we're all kind of the view that we need to know what Edu actually really does on a day-to-day basis. I've asked this question before, and it's about, I'm told it's about sort of knitting together, the youth teams with the senior squad, and making sure there's an identifiable Arsenal way. It's quite nebulous.
Sure.
And then obviously Sagné, there've been some examples of him making deals that clearly are quite imaginatively put together, like the Pepe deal.
Saliba deal, even?
The Saliba deal, yeah, absolutely. I mean, but clearly there's got to be someone else doing the talent identification. And then, the other sort of members of the football exco, I mean, I'd ask, Hus Fahmy was signed as a contractual guru, and correct me if I'm wrong, but no Arsenal player has signed a contract since Joe Willock. There are...
Really?
I am 90% certain that no one, since Joe Willock signed in October, we've not had a first-team player put pen to paper on a new deal.
Right. And it's fair to say, isn't it, that there are some very substantial contractual issues facing the club as it stands.
Exactly, and they're starting to affect things on the pitch. It was, I kind of felt it was kind of underappreciated in last night when Mikel Arteta said, I left David Luiz out because of his contract, and so I've left him out. These issues with how Arsenal are managing contracts are now being affected on the pitch. And Luiz himself, I thought you and James discussed the interview very well. He clearly, even as much as he tried to say it's not an excuse, it clearly affected his performance on the pitch. So, you can sort of, for the last few months, it just was a sort of nagging thing in the background. It's pretty clear now that, Arsenal's inability to just get a hold on, their players, get them tied down to new terms. And I do sympathise with, COVID has obviously had a major impact on the finances, and it does prompt you to ask difficult questions. And maybe you would have just taken Luiz's option in normal circumstances. But Arsenal have also had about a month where they've known when the Premier League was restarting, more than a month that they've known that they'd have to sort out temporary contracts for Ceballos, for Luiz, for Mari. It's not really, if you're supposed to have the best executives in the business, which is how Arsenal are supposed to, compete with the teams that have more money than them, then those executives have simply got to be getting everything right straight away. They've got to be making these decisions. They've got to be forcing Arteta's hand on Luiz. If they think they can't justify giving Luiz another 12 months, despite what Arteta wants, then that just has to be a decision that's taken out of Arteta's hands. That's what they're paid to do.
I mean, look, you talk about Sagné and what he talked about himself when he took over in the job about improving contract management. We can't allow situations like the ones we face with Ramsey, and even he admitted that Arsenal made a mistake over Ramsey, but we saw it with Welbeck. Jack Wilshere's a player who left for free. These are issues which don't appear to have been improved in any significant way, and it's sort of interesting that the idea that we shouldn't hear from football executives because they might say things to which we then might hold them accountable seems that's maybe not the right way to do it. Maybe fix the things that you said you were going to fix, or if you can't fix them, let's get somebody who can. Those sort of things. I don't think there's anything wrong with hearing from executives or hearing from Edu about what he's going to do. But obviously with Wenger in charge, there was this figurehead at the club. So everything that came out sort of went through him, and that was lost a little bit, I think, with Unai Emery because of the language issues, and just because he didn't have that kind of presence. Arteta feels like a guy who's a bit more aligned with Wenger than he is with Emery in terms of the way he sees his job and the way he sees, the work that he's got to do. So it might be a case that we hear more from Arteta, meaning we hear less from the executives, which is fine as long as he gets the kind of backing from the executive level that he requires to do the job that he says he wants to do.
Yes. I don't think the executives need to provide a running commentary on things. I don't think we need to hear from Edu once a month.
No.
But it is very odd hearing from Arteta when his view of something is very obviously at odds with the view of those above him. This David Luiz situation, it's just not how well-run clubs operate. Well-run clubs do not have agents with whom they have close ties going on TalkSport to discuss not just the contracts of players that are in their client base, but the overall running of Arsenal.
Yeah. Do you want to put that in a little bit of context for people who might not be aware of what exactly you're referencing to?
Yeah. So obviously Keir Jarabshin, we heard from David Luiz straight after the game. He sort of indicated that the contract had been playing on his mind while he was playing, and Mikel Arteta subsequently confirmed in his press conference that one of the reasons Luiz hadn't been picked was because of the contract hovering over him. In the intervening period, Keir Jarabshin went on TalkSport briefly, and he kind of offered his own analysis on events. Said that there's been. I don't really. It's one of those things where it's quite difficult to say what he really said. There have been talks. They've got. He managed to put a time limit on it. It's got to be sorted this week. We know that Arsenal have got till the 23rd, but it did seem like a way of exerting pressure on the club. Similarly, saying, look, Arsenal have got other issues to sort. I would say, how does Jarabshin feel like he's in a position to pass comment on that? Now, obviously, agents like Keir could pass that comment on many clubs, but we know how involved he's becoming with Arsenal. And one of the things I don't know Jarabshin at all. One of the things I get when I talk to other agents, and I've say we talk about Coutinho or Willian, and we also say that these would be bizarre signings. They wouldn't help Arsenal, but you just never know because there is a clear influence from Jarabshin at Arsenal, and it's obviously he will act in the interest of his clients as much as he's an Arsenal supporter. I think that rather sums it up. You can't have agents dictating your club's business.
Yeah, I mean, look, the other thing that I thought was quite telling about the Jarabshin interview on TalkSport was the way he sort of said, look, I'm not making excuses for David. And he's not making excuses for himself. But, the way Arsenal didn't control the game, that could add to the pressure that the defenders are. Like, I'm not saying it's that, but, it could be this, it could be that. He was sort of wheeling around it in a certain way to sort of say, well, look, it's not really David's fault. It's because, Arsenal don't have a midfield, which maybe we don't. But, that didn't play any part in the fact that a 33-year-old vastly experienced central defender, basically kicked fresh air to let Raheem Sterling score, But this is a guy who watches games in our director's box with Edu and with Raul Sanyehi. And there's video, people can see it on the blog today. There's a link to the video of them high-fiving during a goal. And look, you're in the media. You work as a journalist. You work around Arsenal. And you know that, as a club, they can be quite protective of certain things and certainly protective of the image of the club, and they're quick to rebuff and to refute stories which they feel reflect poorly on the club or various aspects of the club, and that's their right. That's absolutely their right to do that if that's the way that they want to do it. I just wonder, how do you marry, the idea of an agent who has no official role at Arsenal, but is mates with two of our executive committee, who watches games with our executive committee, going on national radio to sort of slag off the team and the quality of the squad to try and defend his client. Why are we accepting that kind of stuff?
It's the sort of thing that an agent would normally say to you, or might say to you in confidence, and say, if you quote me on this, I'll never talk to you again, because... if that came out in public that another agent of another first-team player had been saying that, Arsenal would go, well, we're not working with him again. So I think again, it's one of those things that really says something about the confidence that certain agents can have around their business. And there are clubs where it is very much in your interest to have a good relationship with key agents, because they can sort you out with deals you might not otherwise get. Like, Arsenal are not one of those clubs. They do not need agents to help them out to this extent. If not least because in theory, Raul Sanllehi is supposed to know every agent and every football executive going, and Arsenal still, as we hear from so many players, they still do have a great pull. They're the biggest team in London. They have kind of every advantage going for them at the moment, other than Champions League football. They do not need to be a club where any agent has any real power to set the agenda. They should feel absolutely confident if they wanted to, saying, much like United kind of tried to do with Mino Raiola, saying, we don't really want anything to do with Keir Jarabcham. We don't see this as the potential upside of having Coutinho or Willian parked at our gates for a few years as kind of being worth all this hassle.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't see what the reward is for all the costs that are being borne, not least from, having David Luiz in your squad.
Yeah, and Cedric, who look, the circumstances were a little bit against him, but, that's another loan deal on which we spent a lot of money, which, he might end up never playing for Arsenal, depending on what happens this week in terms of contracts and in terms of, the renewals or extensions that we have to sign. And we've seen other clubs. I think the Suarez situation is quite complicated because he's out of contract with Southampton. So there's a weird thing going on there. But, while we're on Luiz, we have to reference the situation with Pablo Mari and the unfortunate news that he's going to miss the rest of what remains of this season with what is a serious ankle/tendon injury, which you assume is an Achilles tendon injury, which may require surgery. And it leaves Arsenal in a difficult position because, like you say, I think there's a reluctance to give David Luiz a new deal, certainly not a 2-year deal. And, I think committing another 12 months to David Luiz at this point would be foolhardy from an Arsenal point of view. Nevertheless, there is a situation in which we go into the game against Brighton tomorrow with only Shkodran Mustafi and Rob Holding fit as senior central defenders. Callum Chambers is injured long term. Socrates has got a couple of weeks out at least with a thigh injury, so he's going to miss quite a bit of football. And after that, you're looking at kids. Luiz, of course, is suspended for the next 2 games anyway because of his red card against Manchester City. So, that's a headache for Arsenal. That's a headache for Mikel Arteta. Do you think it might force Arsenal's hand in terms of the Luiz situation? At the very least, maybe offering him a short-term extension. Whether or not he'll sign that, of course, is another question.
Yeah, certainly it might force their hand. Again, I think this comes back to people above Arteta having the courage of their convictions. I would, again, the numbers are what he's conceding: a penalty every 8 games, a red card every 15. Ultimately, I have no idea how good a player Zech Medley is. I suspect that he, whatever level he is at, he would not be the sort of player that actively harms your cause once every 6 weeks. You in the end, you kind of have to say, if you choose to keep Luiz till the end of the season, and he agrees with that. I see a logic. You've just got to have a body there that can sit on the bench, tide you over, and you kind of figure, well, he's probably not going to have another game like Man City. But you can't, in the end, if you are clearly looking at him and having question marks over, this 33-year-old that makes a lot of mistakes is on high money. None of those things are changed just because Pablo Mari has an injury that it sounds like will also rule him out of early next season. You are saving about £7 million if you don't take Luiz's option for the next year. And I know that the talk was that they'd get him on a lower salary, but you'd still be, paying significant money, which is far better invested elsewhere in the squad. I mean, I know that we've kind of everyone's sort of given up on Socrates, and we all understandably have question marks over Mustafi. That much like Luiz, I think you've got to look at the long picture and say, okay, I thought he was actually quite good against City. He's had a good run of games, but I need a lot more before I'm convinced that there's a real future there. But ultimately, I'd still be inclined to say there's nothing we can do about these players. There's probably not going to be many takers for them in the summer. Better to persevere with them next season than Luiz, because Luiz, you have that out. And I know that Arteta wants to keep him, but every coach believes they're the one to fix any player. Other than Emery with Mustafi, that's the one exception. But every coach other than that, we saw it with Brendan Rodgers and Balotelli. We've seen it with so many coaches and Luiz. The purpose of having a technical director and a head of football is to go, oh, look, Mikel, we really do have faith in you. We believe if anyone can get a consistent tune out of David Luiz, it's you. But, these are the finances behind it. This is why we don't feel like we can take that risk. If you like a project, here is one more year of Shkodran Mustafi. That can be your project for the next season. But
good luck with it.
Yeah, enjoy. But you have to. I think a lot of the problems Arsenal have made in transfer markets over the past few years have been reacting to injuries and just sort of going, oh, it's 8 million here, it's a loan fee there. Let's just do it. Let's just waste money on Denis Suarez. It's better ultimately. Right now, 7 million in the bank saved on Luiz's wages strikes me as better value than giving Luiz another year just because you haven't got Mari.
Yeah, and we wait and see what happens with Pablo Mari in terms of the seriousness of the injury, how long he's going to be out, and whether or not it has any impact on our desire to sign him on a permanent basis. I suspect that they probably will keep him and go through with that, but that'll come out in the wash, I'm sure. So, I mean, at this point, given what's going on and given where we are, you would be far more inclined to look to someone like Zach Medley or Danny Ballard, who's the young Northern Irish central defender at the club, who does have senior caps, I think, or certainly at least was called up to the Northern Ireland squad. He went out on loan earlier in the season and picked up an injury and was cut short. So there are a couple of options. You'd be more inclined to just say, look, if Luiz isn't going to sign, or we're not going to sign Luiz, let's give these kids a chance. Mustafi, Holding and Socrates could play all the games between now and the end of the season, and they could just be back up anyway. Yeah,
I'd absolutely do that. And you've got Tierney as well, who is, I don't think you can read much into how he performed as a centre-back in a glorified exhibition when Arsenal were 2 goals down. But if that's what you have to do in an emergency situation, I think you do that rather than wasting money, gambling money. And it's also just about, is it helpful right now to have the David Luiz contract hanging over your head, whether it's something that you're just going to have to solve next year, or whether it's something you're going to have to solve at the end of the season. Sometimes I think even if it means a sort of short-term pain, well, Arsenal are going to go through short-term pain anyway this season.
Yeah.
Just take that and sort of clear the decks a bit. I think David Luiz is a really, really nice guy, incredibly charming. But I do think, you've got to... It's a problem that's hanging over Arteta's head. And, as we've said earlier, it's a problem that's starting to have an impact on the pitch. And I think where possible, it's incumbent on, senior people at Arsenal to see those problems and deal with them, which I know made it sound a bit like they're sort of going to get a Terminator to clear out the Arsenal squad. But I just mean, just be a bit proactive. Just say, this is going to be an issue, but we can nip it in the bud.
Speaking of issues, and one which, certainly hasn't been nipped in the bud because it's been ongoing, is Mesut Ozil. Not in the squad for the game against Manchester City. I don't think his omission from the team for Manchester City would have surprised a single person. The omission from the squad altogether is a different message. And in the press conference last night, Mikel Arteta was quite open about it. And he actually said that I've been very open with Mesut from day one since I joined. I thought when I thought he was fit and willing and he wanted to perform at the level he can do, he has played every game with me. And he said, the moment that I see he is ready again to do that, I will treat him like anybody else, which is quite an interesting and pointed thing to say. I think it's good. He's leaving the door open. He's not, he's not cutting off his nose to spite his face or anything like that. He said also, I think I have been more than fair with him, which suggests that, perhaps there have been issues for him to deal with and things that he has had to contend with since he took over as manager. He says, I think he's responded in many games the way I want. That's it. And he said there's a lot that's happened to him in the last few weeks. So I don't know what that is. He's become a father recently as well. So maybe there's something going on there, or he's just very tired. I don't know. But, it is another chapter of the what the fuck is going on with Mesut Ozil book, which has been written over the last couple of years at Arsenal.
I feel, if nothing else, at least, you're flicking through it and you can see it's sort of like, oh, there's only 100 pages left. The end is inside. I think that the frustrating thing is, I don't want to force this analogy too much, but it really feels like we've kind of read these plot points before. Right down to that tweet, which was, that I know there are an awful lot of people, I'm sure, who listen to this podcast who love watching Mesut Ozil play. And guess what? Like, when he's on form, I'm sure, Andrew, you'd agree, it's still, that 45 minutes against Chelsea, he can still be a joy to watch. But if you're not seeing through the implication of this tweet, you kind of got to ask yourself serious questions. It is about saying, look, I still, I love this club 100%, isn't it? 100%, no matter what, I'm invested in this club. And then I have to ask then, I don't know what Arteta was referring to, but if you're 100% invested in a club, am I to then assume that the one goal and the one assist Arteta got from 10 Premier League games where you started, is that you at 100%? If so, well, if that's your level, thanks a lot for hitting that level, but that's just not good enough for Arsenal. And if it's not, I guess maybe that is some explanation for why Ozil didn't travel. It's another thing that is draining it must be draining for Arteta. It was draining for Emery. And, there's a lot of things where I don't have much sympathy with him, but I thought he was continually handed a really difficult brief in terms of managing this Ozil situation. It was well known, and I think he felt compelled to admit that it was club policy to not really play Ozil, to sideline him. Now, whether that's club policy, you sidelining him because you don't think he's good enough, or you just are trying to come up with reasons to convince him that from a footballing perspective, he'd be happier elsewhere, I don't know. But it's hard to see what the way out is. But again, I think kind of a way out needs to be found that suits all parties. If Ozil really does care deeply about Arsenal, I don't know what the situation is. I don't doubt that he cares deeply about Arsenal, but if you do, then do you see that this is a really toxic situation that you are not free from responsibility for? I don't know.
Do you see a way out before the end of his contract, or is it a case that it's just a matter of eking out whatever you can get from Ozil as a player who, it's fair to say, over the last couple of years, in terms of his form, in terms of his availability, his fitness, his end product, his contributions, has waned massively, and people can point to all kinds of external factors, and they can point to it being Emery, for example, or his tactics. And I'm not going to sit here and defend the kind of football that we played under Unai Emery, but it wasn't something that started under Emery himself. Towards the tail end of the Wenger era, he was beginning to slip away from being the player that was such a joy to watch when he had that season when he created 19 assists and almost broke Thierry Henry's record. That sort of vision and creativity and impact in games is not something he has had for a long time. So even if you love Ozil, you can't be blind to what he's producing or not producing. So from an Arsenal point of view, it's very difficult. It's going to be very difficult to find a new destination for him, and he might not even want to go until his contract is up, etc., etc. So it is a tricky one for Arteta to try and handle with or without the support at executive level. We don't quite know, because when you talk about Emery saying it was club policy, he sort of said it, and there was like complete silence from everyone behind him. It was like he said it, and then it was like, nobody gave him any backing in that regard. And then eventually Emery sort of capitulated and had to bring him back into the team because he needed creativity from somewhere. So I mean, how do you see it? How do you see it playing out, or is it just one of those situations that's too difficult to be definitive about?
I certainly couldn't be definitive about it in terms of, if the club feel that they just don't want him around next season, as far as I can see, the only way out would be to pay up the overwhelming majority or perhaps all of the final year of his contract and just say, Mesut, here's a farewell payment, but we just think, we're better off the two parties, the club and yourself, just parting ways. I mean, this is me speculating here. I don't know if that's something that Arsenal could do. I don't know if it's something they could afford to do. But I think otherwise that it just has to be from across the club. If you don't think Mesut Ozil is a player you want to build around, then you're going to need to have the courage of your convictions to stick by that. And that's the only way it stops being an issue. I think the problem with Emery's management of Ozil was that he didn't manage to, whenever something went wrong, his default panic reaction was, right, I'm going to bring back in Ozil. And, we all knew that he wasn't setting up the team to get the best out of Ozil. He was, there was not a great relationship between the two of them. And so Ozil didn't play very well, didn't play dreadfully, but didn't play as well as he could. Was dropped again, and it just kept becoming a story. If you want this to not be a story, then you kind of have to take a definitive stance either way. Now, maybe that's Ozil kind of sits on the bench quite often, because there's not, as you said, there's not really a convincing argument for why he wouldn't have a role in a 20-man squad against Manchester City from purely footballing terms. If nothing else, it's the 95th minute, it's 0-0, Arsenal have a free kick in a wide channel. You'd want to be able to bring on Ozil to take it. Again, I think it's about being able to back Arteta publicly and privately in whatever he feels is the right thing to do. I think everyone is it's tiring. It's exhausting. It's exhausting for fans. I think I really hope that, when the time comes when Mesut Ozil departs, that it will take some sustained effort, but we can remember just how great he was for longer than people remember now. Maybe not as long as Arsenal would have hoped, But the situation is exhausting. It distracts from other things. It distracts Arteta from other things. Again, it just needs someone. It needs the people at the top of the club to really, take a decision here, whatever that is, and for Arteta to be in a position where he knows he can stick by his guns. I don't know. As I talk about it, I don't know what to do with that anymore.
Yeah, it is. It's extremely complicated. But, we'll see whether or not there is that leadership and that decision making. Let's move on just very finally towards the game tomorrow against Brighton. Another away game for Arsenal. I think it's 4 out of the next 5 are away from home. Do you envisage many changes from the team that played against Man City? Was it about getting some of those players up to speed, or how do you see this one going? I mean, the City game, because of the difficulty of it, it never felt to me like a game we were going to win. So this was the one I was looking at as, as the game in which we could start again, if you like. It didn't go particularly well on Wednesday night. There were injuries. Xhaka will be out. Pablo Mari will be out. So he's going to have to make some changes. And obviously there are going to be physical effects on the players having played 90 minutes, having not played for, 3 months. Kieran Tierney, for example, hadn't played 90 minutes in over 6 months, So it feels like because of the schedule, we might see changes which are more predicated on the physical aspects of what's going on than the performances that we saw on Wednesday night.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I think Tierney looked pretty knackered towards the end of the game. I guess we'll see players like Holding come in. Midfield's quite an interesting one. I'm assuming Guendouzi is now a starter for pretty much every game left this season, which will be interesting considering how much he runs around the pitch. It does seem to have limitless energy reserves, but if anything's going to test them, it'll be the next few weeks. I wonder if we might see someone like Nelson come in on the right wing, and maybe then you can put Saka at left back and give Tierney a bit of a break. It's a tough one to call. I just think at the moment there are, I was told there are a lot of players with niggling or a lot is probably exaggerating. A significant number though of players with niggling injuries. Obviously, we saw Socrates wasn't ready. Lucas Torreira still a way off. I think that injury was just awful timing. And he probably would have been back by now under normal circumstances, but it's not a great way to recover from a broken ankle. So, remarkably, everyone was saying beforehand, it'd be great to see how Arteta copes with a full squad. I think the squad is pretty much now at the stage where you call it threadbare. So a lot of those changes are just going to be enforced upon him.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few little injuries, aren't there? There's a few sort of aches and strains which might go some way, perhaps to explaining why Nicolas Pepe, for example, wasn't in the squad, or not in the team rather, for the game against City. So those sort of little ongoing issues. Exactly.
I mean, how much the best thing for players with those strains like Pepe is to just play through it. I mean, again, Arteta doesn't know. He's got nothing to fall back on. No past example of how managers coped in this situation. It's going to be tough. Brighton are also, I think, are a really good team. I don't particularly think that having that experience of playing in lockdown in a closed stadium will help any more than having a much fresher squad will. Yeah. It's going to be a really hard game. I fear for Arsenal a little bit. I think this might be a crashing back down to even further game.
Okay, well, look, we'll see what happens. It's difficult to know how Brighton are going to be affected by this, but I'm not sure. I think you're right that, playing just 3 days before is that much of a benefit to us. But look, they all have to get into this schedule. They all have to get into this sort of round of games where they're playing every 3 or 4 days. And look, there's nothing like a good win to change the mood. So let's hope that happens and we can enjoy what's left of our weekend. Am I right in thinking that this game, being broadcast live at 3:00 on a Saturday, is a game changer?
It is a game changer for the United Kingdom. We have
Arsenal do it again.
Absolutely, first on Match of the Day, first on 3D smell-o-vision broadcast.
First with floodlights.
We are game changers, absolute game changers.
Whatever else about this club, we can take heart in those weird, strange records that we make. And let's hope that it's a win on our first 3 p.m. game, or the very first game to be broadcast live in the UK at 3 p.m. on a Saturday. James, as always, great to talk to you. Thanks a million.
My pleasure. Thank
you very much indeed to James. You can find him on Twitter at James Benge. That is at James Benge, or you can read his stuff in football.london. I wasn't going to faff around with the start. I'm not going to faff around with the end. This is a sort of wham bam, thank you ma'am, Arsecast. Let's just keep fingers crossed for a good win against Brighton. Any kind of win, a good win, a bad win, an indifferent win, a fluky win, a lucky win, a convincing win. There are all kinds of wins you can have. I'm not picky. I'll just take a plain old regular win, if that's okay with everybody. Once it's a win, I am all right. But look, we know it's a difficult time. It's difficult circumstances. We have issues with the squad and the team and everything else. So who knows what the fuck is going to happen. What I can tell you is that we will be covering the game on Arseblog with a live blog as always, plus all the pre and post-match stuff on arseblog.news. So you can get stats, player ratings, match report, all that kind of crack. So make sure you join us for that. Hopefully it'll put a bit of a spring in our step and help us enjoy the rest of the weekend. James and I will be here on Monday with an Arsecast Extra to discuss whatever happens against Brighton tomorrow. So until then, folks, take it easy. Cheers. Bye-bye. Welcome back to Talk Shite Radio, talking shite about sport 24 hours a day. Now, after Arsenal's heavy defeat in Manchester on Wednesday night, all the focus is on the terrible performance by England international centre-half David Luiz. It has put his future at the club in doubt, but his agent Keith Joachim says he wants to stay. Keith is on the phone now. Hello, Keith.
Oh, hello.
Not a great night for your client on Wednesday night in Manchester.
No, look, I'm not here to make excuses for Davey or anything like that, but, you know, there are some mitigating circumstances that you have to take into account in every game, every performance, every player.
Okay, well, what exactly were the mitigating circumstances in which Davey completely missed the ball, kicking fresh air, allowing the striker in behind him to score the opening goal?
Well, look, of course, Davey takes responsibility for all that, but if you're to look at the passage of play, what about the midfielder who didn't make the tackle and the manager who picked that midfielder? Now, I'm not saying it's not Davey's fault, but there are other things at play here.
And when he conceded the penalty in the second half by kicking the opponent straight in the testicles while the ball was up the other end of the pitch, how do you view that incident?
Look, I'll admit, at first it looks like an ironclad penalty, but what Davey told me was that he saw a wasp on the guy's groin, and he didn't want him to get stung in the helmet, so he tried to just kick it away like a good citizen. Unfortunately, it did look as if he just, smashed him right in the bollocks, but that's not the case at all.
And I suppose the big question that people will have is over the red card. In the current climate, you would have to say that reacting to what appeared to be a fairly reasonable referee decision when he clearly handled the ball just outside the box by then coughing in the face of the official wasn't really acceptable behaviour for anyone, let alone a professional footballer.
Oh, that whole thing's been blown completely out of proportion. Davey, he just had a cracker before he came on the pitch, and a bit of it got caught in his throat, and if he hadn't coughed, he could have choked to death. Is that what people want? To see footballers dying on the pitch? Again, I'm not shirking any responsibility on Davey's part, but really the true culprit is whoever gave him the cracker before the game. And that was a manager. So if you want to blame anyone, blame him.
As always, Keith Joachim, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I've never heard anyone so full of shit in my entire life, but it's always entertaining. This is Talk Shite Radio, talking shite about sport 24 hours a day. When we come back, Sam Allardyce's COVID workout. Just to be clear, that's lying on the sofa eating cake.
Talk Shite Radio, talking shite about sport 24 hours a day. 24 hours a day.